The morning started like any other Tuesday in my quiet neighborhood of Cedar Hill, Oregon. I was in my backyard, deadheading the roses that Dorothy and I had planted 15 years ago, when I heard Michael's truck pull into my driveway. It was 9:30 a.m. on a workday, which immediately struck me as odd, since my son usually worked regular business hours at Patterson Sales Group. But what really caught my attention was the U-Haul trailer attached to the back of his pickup truck. My name is Richard Thompson, though everyone calls me Rick, and at 65 years old, I thought I'd figured out most of life's surprises. I've been a widower for 3 years now, ever since Dorothy lost her battle with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. These days, I live alone in the 4-bedroom house we built together in 1994, keeping busy with my landscaping business and trying to maintain the gardens that were Dorothy's pride and joy. Michael is my only child, 38 years old, married to Jennifer for 12 years. They have 2 kids, Emma, who's 10, and Lucas, who's 7. Good kids, both of them, though I don't see them as much as I'd like since they live about 40 minutes away in Portland. Michael works in sales. Jennifer is a part-time medical receptionist, and by all accounts they've been doing well enough to afford their own 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. That's why the U-Haul trailer was so puzzling. I set down my gardening shears and walked around to the front of the house, where Michael was getting out of his truck. He looked tired, more tired than I'd seen him in years. His usually neat appearance was disheveled. Wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, the kind of exhaustion that comes from stress rather than physical work. "Hey, Dad," he called out, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced." "Of course not," I replied, though I was increasingly curious about the trailer full of what looked like furniture and boxes. "What's going on, son?" Before Michael could answer, Jennifer emerged from the passenger side, followed by Emma and Lucas from the back seat. The kids immediately ran over to hug me. They always did that, bless them. But Jennifer's greeting was more subdued than usual. She looked as stressed as Michael, maybe more so. "Hi, Rick," she said, giving me a quick hug. "Thanks for... well, we'll explain everything in a minute." "Grandpa!" Emma exclaimed, still hanging onto my arm. "Guess what? We're going to live with you." My heart skipped a beat. "What's that, sweetheart?" "We're moving in," Lucas added excitedly. "Mom and Dad said we get to stay in your house now." I looked over the children's heads at Michael and Jennifer, both of whom were suddenly very interested in staring at their shoes. A cold feeling of understanding began to settle in my chest. "Maybe we should go inside and talk," Michael said quietly. As we walked toward the front door, another car pulled into my driveway, Jennifer's mother Helen in her aging Toyota Camry. Helen was 72 years old and had been showing signs of early dementia for the past year. She was a sweet woman, but increasingly confused and requiring more supervision as time went on. "Oh good, Mom made it," Jennifer said with what sounded like relief. "We weren't sure she'd remember the directions." Helen got out of her car carrying a suitcase and looking around my property with the slightly lost expression that had become familiar to all of us over the past few months. "Jennifer, dear," she called out, "is this the hotel? It's very nice, but I don't remember making a reservation." "No, Mom," Jennifer said patiently, walking over to take her mother's arm. "Remember, we talked about this. We're staying with Rick for a while." "Rick?" Helen looked at me with genuine confusion. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" This was new. The last time I'd seen Helen, about 6 weeks ago at Emma's birthday party, she'd remembered me perfectly well. Her condition was clearly progressing faster than I'd realized. We all went inside, the kids immediately running upstairs to explore what they apparently already considered their new home. I led the adults to my living room, where Michael finally began to explain what was happening. "Dad, I'm going to be straight with you," he began, though something in his tone suggested he was still planning to leave out important details. "We're going through a rough patch financially. I lost my job 8 months ago, and the new one pays significantly less. Jennifer's been picking up extra hours at the clinic, but it's not enough to cover the mortgage and all of Helen's medical expenses." I nodded, processing this information. I'd known Michael had changed jobs, but he'd made it sound like a lateral move, not a significant step down. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "But what does this have to do with the U-Haul in my driveway?" Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances, and I could see they'd rehearsed this conversation. Well, Jennifer said, we were wondering if we could stay here for a while, just temporarily, until we get back on our feet financially. It would help us save money on rent and utilities, and it would be good for Helen, Michael added. She needs more supervision than Jennifer can provide while working, and this way you could keep an eye on her during the day. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. They were asking me to take in not just them and their 2 children, but also Jennifer's mother, who required increasing levels of care that I was completely unprepared to provide. How long is temporarily? I asked carefully. 6 months, maybe a year, Michael said. Just until I can find a better position and we can get our finances sorted out. And Helen's care requirements? Oh, she's pretty self-sufficient, Jennifer said quickly. She just needs someone to make sure she takes her medications and doesn't wander off. Nothing too complicated. This didn't match what I'd observed about Helen's condition, but before I could question it further, Michael dropped the bombshell. The thing is, Dad, we've already sold our house. The closing is next Friday, and we need to be out by then. We were hoping we could move our stuff in over the next few days. The room went completely silent. I stared at my son, trying to process what he'd just told me. You sold your house before asking if you could move in here. We knew you'd say yes, Michael replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Your family. Family helps family, right? Michael, I said, my voice carefully controlled. You made a major life decision that affects me without consulting me first. You assumed I'd agree to completely reorganize my life to accommodate your family, including taking on caregiving responsibilities for someone with dementia. It's not caregiving, Jennifer protested. Helen just needs companionship during the day. At that moment, as if summoned by the mention of her name, Helen appeared in the living room doorway looking confused and distressed. Jennifer, she said, her voice shaky. I can't find the bathroom, and I think I've had an accident. Jennifer's face reddened as she quickly got up to help her mother. The just needs companionship description was clearly a significant understatement. While Jennifer was upstairs helping Helen, I turned to Michael with the serious expression I'd perfected during his teenage years. Son, I need you to be completely honest with me about your financial situation. How bad is it really? Michael's composure cracked slightly. It's pretty bad, Dad. We're about $30,000 in credit card debt. Plus, we took out a second mortgage on the house last year when Helen's medical expenses started piling up. The job market has been brutal, and the position I found pays about 40% less than what I was making before. $30,000 in credit card debt? I repeated, shocked. Michael, how did you let it get that bad? It wasn't supposed to get that bad, he said defensively. Helen's medications cost $800 a month, even with insurance. Then she started needing specialized care, and Jennifer had to cut back her hours to take care of her. Everything just snowballed. I began to understand the scope of what they were asking me to take on. This wasn't just about providing temporary housing for a family going through a rough patch. This was about becoming a full-time caregiver for someone with progressive dementia, while also supporting a family with serious financial problems. Michael, I'm 65 years old. I'm not equipped to care for someone with Helen's condition. What happens if she wanders off? What if she has a medical emergency? What if her condition deteriorates and she becomes violent or completely disoriented? We've thought about that, Michael said, though his expression suggested they really hadn't. Jennifer works in healthcare, so she knows how to handle medical situations, and Helen's not violent. She's just confused sometimes. Sometimes? I thought about the woman who'd just asked if my house was a hotel and couldn't remember who I was. Michael, she didn't recognize me today. 6 weeks ago, she knew exactly who I was. Before Michael could respond, Emma came bounding down the stairs. Grandpa, which room is mine? Mum said I could pick between the blue room and the yellow room. My heart sank. They'd already told the children this was happening. Emma and Lucas were already planning their new lives in my house, probably excited about the adventure of living with Grandpa. How could I possibly disappoint them now? Emma, sweetheart, I said gently, your parents and I are still discussing the living arrangements. Why don't you and Lucas go play in the backyard for a bit while the adults talk? Okay, she said cheerfully, running back upstairs to get her brother. When she was out of earshot, I turned back to Michael with growing frustration. You told the kids this was definite before you even talked to me. We had to tell them something, Michael said. They knew we were packing up the house. They knew something was changing. You could have told them you were exploring options, not that they were definitely moving in with Grandpa. Jennifer returned from upstairs, looking frazzled. Helen's fine now, she said. I got her changed and settled in the guest room for a nap. Jennifer, I said, I need you to be honest with me about Helen's condition. How often does she have episodes like this? Jennifer's facade of everything being manageable finally cracked. More often lately, she admitted. Maybe 2 or 3 times a week. The doctor says it's normal progression for her type of dementia. What about nighttime? Does she sleep through the night? Not always. Sometimes she gets confused about where she is and tries to leave. We've had to put locks on the doors that she can't reach. I felt overwhelmed. They were asking me to transform my peaceful retirement home into a care facility for someone with progressing dementia, while also housing a family of 4 and dealing with the stress of their financial crisis. Michael, Jennifer, I said carefully, I understand you're in a difficult situation and I want to help, but what you're proposing is a complete life change for me, and frankly, I don't think I'm qualified to provide the level of care Helen needs. But where else can we go? Jennifer asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. We can't afford assisted living for Mum, and we can't afford our own place anymore. You're our only option. The emotional manipulation was subtle but clear. If I said no, I'd be abandoning my son's family in their time of need, forcing them into homelessness, and condemning Helen to inappropriate care. Let me ask you something, I said. Have you researched what kind of care Helen actually needs? Have you looked into day programs for dementia patients or respite care options, or what resources are available to help families in your situation? The blank looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know. They'd seen my large, empty house as the solution to all their problems without considering the complexity of what they were asking. I think, I said slowly, we need to pump the brakes on this whole plan and explore some alternatives. But Dad, Michael said, panic creeping into his voice, we close on the house Friday. We have to be out. We don't have anywhere else to go. You should have thought about that before you sold your house without having a concrete backup plan, I replied, my patience finally wearing thin. The next few hours were among the most difficult I'd experienced since Dorothy's death. Michael and Jennifer alternated between pleading, explaining, and subtly threatening. The children kept asking when they could start moving their toys into their new rooms. Helen woke from her nap confused about where she was and asking to go home. Finally, I called a family meeting in the living room. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. I'm willing to help, but not in the way you've planned. Michael, I'll co-sign for a small apartment for your family, something you can afford on your current income. Jennifer, I'll help you research proper care options for Helen, including day programs and respite services, and I'll contribute financially to Helen's care costs for the next 6 months while you get your finances stabilized. But Dad, Michael protested, that'll cost you way more than just letting us live here. Maybe, I said, but it'll preserve everyone's dignity and ensure Helen gets the specialized care she needs. More importantly, it'll teach you to solve your own problems instead of expecting others to sacrifice their lives for your poor planning. Jennifer started crying. We can't afford an apartment, even with your help. The deposits alone are more than we have. Then we'll figure out the deposits too, I said. But I'm not turning my home into a care facility and giving up my independence because you made financial decisions without considering all the consequences. Michael's face was red with frustration and embarrassment. I can't believe you're abandoning us like this. I'm not abandoning you, I replied firmly. I'm helping you in a way that's sustainable for everyone involved. What you were asking me to do wasn't help, it was enabling. Over the next week, we worked out a different solution. I helped them secure a 2-bedroom apartment about 10 minutes from my house. I covered the deposits and first month's rent and co-signed the lease. We found a day program for seniors with dementia that Helen could attend 3 days a week, giving Jennifer time to work more hours. I also connected them with a social worker who specialized in elder care, who helped them navigate Medicare benefits and other resources they hadn't known existed. The arrangement wasn't what Michael and Jennifer had originally wanted, but it worked. They maintained their independence while getting the support they needed. Helen received appropriate care from trained professionals. The children adapted to apartment living better than expected, especially since they could still visit Grandpa's house regularly. Most importantly, I was able to continue living my own life while supporting my family in a way that didn't compromise anyone's dignity or well-being. 3 months later, Michael found a better-paying job. 6 months after that, they were financially stable enough that I could reduce my support. Helen's condition continued to deteriorate, but with proper resources and professional guidance, Jennifer was better equipped to handle the challenges. The day Michael and his family moved into their apartment, he came to see me alone. "Dad," he said, "I owe you an apology. What we were asking of you wasn't fair. We were so desperate that we didn't think about what it would mean for your life." "I understand desperation," I replied, "but I also understand that sometimes the easy solution isn't the right solution. You needed to learn how to solve problems without expecting someone else to sacrifice everything. You could have just said yes," he pointed out. "It would have been easier for everyone in the short term. Easier, yes, but it wouldn't have helped you learn to handle crisis situations as adults. And it wouldn't have been fair to Helen, who deserved proper care, not just someone watching her while she deteriorated." Michael nodded. "Jennifer's mum is doing better in the day program than we expected. She seems to enjoy the structured activities and social interaction. Professional caregivers know things that family members don't," I explained. "They're trained to handle the challenges of dementia in ways that preserve dignity and maximize quality of life." 6 months later, when Helen's condition had progressed to the point where she needed full-time care, the family was prepared. They'd learned about the resources available, built relationships with healthcare professionals, and saved enough money to afford a good memory care facility. The transition was still difficult, but it was planned and appropriate rather than desperate and chaotic. Looking back, I realized that saying no to Michael's original plan was one of the hardest things I'd ever done as a parent. Every instinct told me to say yes, to open my home and my life to help my son's family in their time of need. But sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to enable poor decision-making, even when that refusal causes immediate pain. If I had agreed to their original plan, Michael and Jennifer would never have learned to navigate the healthcare system for elderly family members. They would never have discovered the resources available to help families in their situation. They would have continued to make financial decisions based on the assumption that someone else would always be there to bail them out. More importantly, Helen would have received inadequate care from a well-meaning but untrained family member instead of the professional support she needed and deserved. The children, who had initially been excited about living with Grandpa, adapted to apartment life and discovered they actually preferred having their own space. Emma later told me she was glad they hadn't moved in with me because it meant they could visit my house as a special treat instead of it just being where they lived. 2 years later, our family relationships are stronger than ever. Michael and Jennifer have learned to manage their finances more responsibly and to research solutions to problems before making desperate decisions. Helen lived her final months in a memory care facility where she received specialized attention and participated in activities designed for people with her condition. When Helen passed away last spring, Jennifer thanked me for insisting on proper care, instead of just accepting the burden myself. "If Mom had lived with you," she said, "I would have spent her final years feeling guilty about the inadequate care she was receiving. This way, I know she had the best possible quality of life given her condition." I think about that morning when Michael pulled up with the U-Haul trailer, expecting me to completely restructure my life to solve problems he'd created through poor planning and unrealistic expectations. The easy answer would have been yes. The loving answer, as it turned out, was no. Sometimes being a good parent means refusing to rescue your adult children from the consequences of their decisions. Sometimes being a good in-law means insisting on appropriate care for vulnerable family members instead of accepting inadequate arrangements. And sometimes being a good grandfather means teaching by example that problems require thoughtful solutions, not just quick fixes that pass the burden to someone else. My house is still quiet most days, still filled with memories of Dorothy and the life we built together. But now it's also filled with regular visits from grandchildren who see it as a special place to visit Grandpa, rather than just another place where they happen to live. Michael and Jennifer have built their own stability and learned to handle crises without expecting someone else to sacrifice everything. That Tuesday morning when Michael announced that his wife, children, and mother-in-law were going to live in my house, I could have said yes and changed the trajectory of all our lives. Instead, I said, let's find a better solution, and taught my family that love sometimes looks like saying no, especially when yes would enable dependency rather than growth. The U-Haul trailer that seemed like such a crisis that morning became the catalyst for my son's family learning to solve their own problems, while still accepting appropriate help from people who loved them. Sometimes the most important gift you can give your family isn't what they're asking for, it's what they actually need.